Hey y'all, hey, it's Filter Free Friday. I'm so glad y'all here. I am thinking about today what kind of resources I have at my disposal that I use all the time. And Pastor Darren Edwards here in Kansas City was the one who kind of introduced me to King's work, Chaos or Community. And the title's like, Where do we go from here? And in this little piece of work, you get to see that sometimes the narrative is that we won't be able to fix all the problems today because everybody's not on the same page and we don't have any leaders. But when you really read the words of King in the last few couple years of his life, what you start to see is he did not have as much support as people think he had. What you'll start to see was that there were many factions that were focused on civil rights and human rights in a lot of different ways that did not align to his thinking. In fact, this week, someone said to me, we were talking about the importance of legislation and policy and practice change in order to really move a needle forward. Like sometimes I am on this empathy journey, pushing people to be more empathetic. I think it is foundational and important. And sometimes when people don't have empathy, we need laws to make certain things illegal because people don't have empathy, right? So we're having this conversation. And she says to me, she says, well, I don't really agree philosophically with King. And I didn't say anything because I'm also reading this book called The Art of Shutting the F Up. But what is interesting to me is if you think about any singular civil rights leader, if that really is a thing, who has been the most impactful to get legislation pushed and changed other than King? And while we might today, going back in history and rewriting it through the lens of what we know now, the access we have now, who else got the Voting Rights Act pushed through to completion? Who else got civil rights legislation pushed through to completion? And I think, sometimes we can be critical. And I think criticism is okay as long as we're being fair and as long as we're being honest about some of the many of the things that we've been afforded today are because of the courageous actions of the likes of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And so with that, Tina Turner died this week, and I remember reading I, Tina when I was like 10 or 11. I wasn't supposed to read that book. It was banned, at least in my house. It wasn't Christian. Like, I don't know if you know, she was practicing Buddhist philosophy. There were lots of details about sex and abuse and drug use. And so, not the kind of thing you want an 11-year-old kid to read, but I read it and I remember being inspired by her life. And when she, came out on her own as Tina Turner and kind of reinvented herself in this like rock and roll way, Simply the Best is one of the songs that I remember because I was in middle school. And today when I look at those lyrics, I of course know that she was talking about her love relationship. But for me, to hear someone just say over and over and over again that you are simply the best, better than all the rest, was something that my own spirit needed. And so I'm grateful for the life of Tina Turner and the fact that she persevered and overcame in order to be able to provide us with beautiful music in the world. But what people were sharing this week in many of the rest in peace pieces that I saw was Ike Turner didn't add anything to her life, or that we wish we could have the pictures without Ike. And there's a question I'm always wrestling with, and it is, I'm trying to remember how the adage goes. It's like the wound is the, something like the wound is the work, or the wound is the, is also the joy. Because does Anna Mae Bullock become Tina Turner without the trials and tribulations of what she experienced for 16 years being in proximity to Ike Turner, who was clearly very abusive? And I don't know what the answer to that question is, but what I think is important for us to think about today is if we had met Tina Turner at 3 years into her abusive relationship, would we have written her off because we're like, you just need to leave and he ain't no good for you? Um, and I remember somebody telling me once, if this path is the way that somebody finds their way to God, would you take it away from them? And I think about my own life and those things that have broken my heart wide open. While I am not in any way, shape, or form saying, please sign me up for the trauma, please sign me up for the pain and hurt, beautiful people don't just happen. They're forged in the fire. It is things that happen to you that then cause you to show up as a better, more humanistic person. At least that's been my experience with how learning how to be a little more empathetic. And so when I think about like where our focus tends to be in the world, and people will talk about the world right now like it's just an absolute dumpster fire. And in many ways it is. But what was it like if you were Araminta Ross, or better known as Harriet Tubman, and the entire country's economic system is based off of your free labor and the torture and the pillage of Black people? That there's nowhere you can go because your skin is the determinant of how you will be treated. Do you imagine that she just kind of sat back and said, like, in what world did she sit back and go, you know what, I can't fix this, like this, this is beyond me, I'm not going to do anything? And one of the most fascinating things that I get to experience in my work is that people with incredible amounts of power and influence, sometimes that's what they do. Instead of looking inward and going, what can I do in order to influence this small part of my life? I have a really good friend even who is just like, it's too much stuff to do around race equity. So all I'm gonna do, I'm gonna just focus on building these houses for myself and my family. Problem is, he white. And so white with generational wealth and privilege, and you're gonna sit on the sidelines? Like how, if not us, then who, right? Like I don't, sometimes I wonder, even in the slightest ways, like right now, Boston is playing Miami in the NBA championship. And Boston's up, I think right now is what, 3-2. And the stats are stacked against Boston. But you can tell, ain't nobody told the Boston Celtics that. Like, if you look at how they played last night, they absolutely like, we can win this whole thing. And I think sometimes those of us who have the ability, those of us who have the passion, the energy, and the commitment to actually change the narrative around what statistics look like, we like to keep presenting the statistics and keep talking about what's wrong. I think about I'm biased because I think about my own life and what I'm able to do today. And I think sometimes where I get misunderstood the most is because I am so grateful that, child, you can't make me bow my head about where I am. And if I'm looking at the world and going, oh, well, I don't have $200 billion like the likes of Jeff Bezos, and I got an issue to pick with him right now. Am I ever gonna feel like if that's my goal, do I appreciate the fact that if I had to take care of somebody and something, that I can, or that I have a house, I have a roof over my head, I have a car I can drive, I have a way to be gainfully employed, I have a way to employ other people? Like, what is it about our focus that goes, there's this thing over there that I don't have, and let me focus my attention there instead of focusing on what I do have and what I can do and how I can move the world and what I can control? I was also last night at an event where there were some pretty hefty powerhouses in the room, and every member of the Divine Nine was present. And one particular president of a group said, hey, I want to figure out how we can work together because our programs overlap. And there was complete silence in the room, but it wasn't lost on me, because ultimately, if you can get two groups of people together who have shared interests, shared community, shared ideas, you can unpack a whole bunch of things. And I think I'm just holding up that King didn't have everybody. So we need to stop saying King got everybody. You think King had people who weren't um had internalized racial oppression? You think King didn't deal with white supremacy in every single industry? Do you think King wasn't afraid? Like he was, and he wrote all those things down for us. And I think we go back in history and we rewrite even our historical figures in ways that's just not accurate. When you find out that King was flawed, just as we are flawed, shouldn't that be something to catapult us to say, okay, if he could do it, then certainly I can? Because he was in a situation pretty much far worse than what I'm in right now. And what's our responsibility to focus? Now, as it relates to Jeff Bezos, y'all know I wrote this book, Spark the Heart, and I got my initial sales numbers, and I don't believe them. And here's why I don't believe them, because I have self-published 6 books before I got to this one. And every single last one of those books, basically, I sold more of in the first week than they're saying that I have of this one. And I just cannot believe that, considering the fact that I've been talking about this book and pubbing this book for 6 months and posting about this book on all these different platforms. I've been on TV talking about it. I've been on people's podcasts. They're talking about this book in Ireland, in Asia, and India. And I'm like, is this how this brother got to $200 billion? Because he's stealing, he ain't trying to give me my royalties on my book sales. Is that what this is? I don't know. But if you have read this book, please go out to Amazon and give me a 5-star review. Because here's what else I know. Several of my friends have gone to Amazon giving me a 5-star review of clients, and they screenshot their review and it still ain't showing up on his site. And there's a situation in which there seems like there's no real good way around it. But for now, even when I think about like how I've been feeling about this and the conversation that I'm going to have with Forbes today, I have been so upset and so off my square because I have been focused on what's wrong, what I don't have the ability to do, instead of the fact that I have created a complete book club kit that's digital and that I'm going to launch. Jocelyn helped me with, that is absolutely amazing. That book sales is not my only gig. I'm not just an author. I have not been focused on the fact that this content, this idea that leadership is inclusive, and that all of that is built on the foundation of empathy, this idea that the world needs to be able to understand things from another person's point of view in order to move things forward, that people have said to me, like, this is impacting my life, and I know that this is what God has called me to do. I know it with everything in my being. And so I guess all I'm saying to you right now is find out who your North Star is going to be, because for me, it is the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s of the world. It is the Nelson Mandelas of the world. And when you really look at their lives, it's the Tina Turners of the world. Then you realize 16 years in an abusive relationship. If somebody was having that experience right now and they were 15 years in, how many of us would discount them, right? How many of us would say that her music ain't great because of this other thing she's got going on? And how many of us would get online and do podcasts and blogs and all the things to talk about how negative her life is? But today, we can look at Tina Turner and go, oh, bless you, Queen, right? How many of us, if we had known all the things that the FBI was planning to use against Dr. King when they were happening, would have been like, nah, he's not fit to be a preacher of a church. Sit him down. He can't leave this movement. How many of us, if we knew that his chief advisor was openly gay, would have been like, nah, we ain't working with them? How many of us? We like to think that people are out here perfect, but let me tell you, child, everybody got something. That's why I wrote The Wholly Educated MFer. Everybody has been uniquely designed to do something in the world, to make some kind of contribution, whatever it is. And everyone is educated in some way, and everybody got that underbelly that they don't want you to know about. And when I think about in my own personal life, the way that people like to look at your underbelly and then they get you focused on your underbelly, here's what I'm saying, and I'm going to let y'all go. All three are important. You see that underbelly, that grit, that gutter behavior is what it makes me be. It's what makes you you. It's what causes you to be able to show up in that holy, purposeful way that you've been designed to do so. And so when we pivot too far to go, oh, look at all this stuff that's wrong, whether it's the world, whether it's our communities, our families, whether it's our own internal stuff we're working on, maybe what we see in front of us is because that's what we're choosing to focus on. And what if we redirected our focus and energy towards those things that would be most helpful to us, most helpful to our families, most helpful to our workplaces, most helpful to our nations, our cities, and the world? What if? I don't know, but that's my word for myself today, and I hope it helped somebody. All right, y'all, it's Filter Free Friday. We got plenty work to do.